I want to talk
I was just
to
going to
John
suggest
Paul
that.
here from Washington. Let's do that. John Paul, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's going on?
Hey guys, I hope you guys are doing well. And Kelley, by the way, condolences to you. Sorry about your loss.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, the reason I'm calling, I often hear atheists, especially on the programs, use the term kind of in a pejorative way towards theists related to magic and supernatural. And I'm, as the definition of those two words, I'm just using Oxford Dictionary, the first main definition. And I guess I was curious what you guys thought about the fact that couldn't those two words be also applied to scientific things that you hold as true in so far as, say, quantum mechanics, in particular, wave particle duality, superposition, entanglement, which, as we know, Einstein called spooky action at a distance, tunneling, et cetera, et cetera. I could keep talking about this.
You said two words. Do you mean magic? Do you mean magic and supernatural? Is that what you mean?
Yes, I do. Yeah, because they are connective. They are connective in the Oxford Dictionary. Under magic, it references mysterious or supernatural forces, and so I'm applying supernatural as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about forces that don't have a great explanation, right, and using magic, right, then I think like that's kind of appropriate. But when I'm using magic in description of like Christianity, for example, I'm talking about like actual, not scientifically explainable forces, right? I'm talking about like supernatural phenomenon that is explicitly cited to be beyond the measures of the material realm, right? And we see that in the Bible numerous times. It's all over the place. So on top of that too, in particular with Christianity, right? Obviously this isn't applying to all religious beliefs, but there is an idea that magic might actually have a real effect in the world, right? As a system, there is more than one occasion where there are people who are doing rituals, one of which, quite famously, when we're talking about Moses, seeing with the Egyptians, right? The Egyptians are using this magic on some staffs that turn into snakes, right? There's people who are doing these kinds of rituals that, God seems to want to stop because, some would argue that they might have some real legitimate power over folks. So like in the sense of Christianity, like there is, at least in the Old Testament, definitely a lot of evidence to suggest that magic is not only just an unexplainable force, but like a real thing in the world to be worried about. So it's not like, just a metaphor or an allegory to talk about unexplainable stuff. It's like a literal thing. So I don't know, that's something to be considered with that. But in regards to like the unexplainable, I don't think that we can always just call that magic in the same sense, right? Because when we're talking about science and breakthroughs that come through with science, everything that we know about quantum dynamics and quantum fluctuations, right, comes through the methodology of science. We aren't using magic and we aren't using divination to come to the conclusions that we find. We are using observable scientific techniques to come to the conclusions of what we're seeing here, that our observations are valid. So I just don't think it's the same thing. Like I don't know if it's fair to say that we can use sort of the same terminology there, because the methods are just completely different. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. I mean, you're
I think predictive.
Go ahead, John Paul.
I was going to say, I think predictability is very important here.
Yeah, that too. Well, but go ahead, John Paul.
You wouldn't say, but I wouldn't say that quantum mechanics has a lot of predictability. I mean, there's a
it does though
on some of it, but on some.
But yes, it does.
Not. It does. So
there's definitely predictability that can come with quantum, like the famous slit, the double slit experiment, right? Like we can predict that, yeah, we're going to see particles be observed in a wave and in a particle, right? Like we're going to be able to see both. Like that's a prediction that we can make in some ways. It may be like, yeah, the actual results themselves are random in some form or fashion, but we can predict that the results are random, right? Like that's still a kind of prediction that we can make. So it's not completely outside of our bounds or of study, right? It's not just like, oh, there's no rhyme or reason to it. We are still, we're still be able to make concrete observations, if that makes sense.
It does. I guess I would say like superposition and quantum computing is based upon just a highly predictable percentage, not 100% accurate, so there isn't 100% predictability. So there's a variation there, but I guess, and so far as it relates to what you were saying regarding the Bible and these issues of magic, I mean, isn't it the core of that? We don't understand. I mean, I don't mean to, this is going to sound me just throwing an idea out, so I understand that. But let's just say that issue with Moses and the staff that you're talking about. What if, in fact, it wasn't, and this is just offering some off-the-wall explanation, but what if it wasn't something that was real, something only they saw? God had a mechanical force in play that if we knew the explanation, it wouldn't seem so mystical. So I guess from that standpoint, it's just our lack of understanding. So we're the observer, we're reading about it, other people observing it. It seems mystical, but maybe it's not mystical. Do you see, would you agree? Just because we don't know what's happening behind the scenes doesn't turn it into the colloquial term of magic.
Well, so I think that with the context of that particular story, though, right, like Moses is trying to demonstrate, oh, we need to have faith in God, right, in Yahweh in particular, right? And there are actual Egyptian magicians, like they are described as such, who are doing the opposite, who are trying to take people, not convince them to follow Moses in that story. So I would find that to be really weird, that God is playing both sides, and is helping out the Egyptian magicians in leading people away from him while simultaneously helping Moses do the miracles that he performed, right? So I don't know if that tracks. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, it does. But designing, I mean, it's hard to argue that one issue or that one example, because I mean, I think if I was looking at it from Yahweh's position, let's just say he was trying to show supremacy, so he obliged the magicians, you could say. But they saw what they saw, and the result was to bring fear. I get it. But my only point, and you mentioned that point, I guess, or that instance. But in general, as these things happen, whether it be whatever miraculous thing happens in the Bible, what if in fact there is an explanation that is more rooted in reality? Right. And we just apply the term magic to it. But yet, again, and making this counter explanation related to science, we do see those things occur, right? We have no explanation for why some of the things happen in quantum mechanics. And the further we look, the worse it gets.
Yeah, but John Paul, I do think there's an explanation rooted in reality. I think that story is just not true. Right. I think people made up a story about something that didn't actually happen. I mean, at best, we could say that people misperceived an event, but I don't even think it's hard to even argue sometimes for a historical Moses, let alone the actual literal events depicted in the Bible. So I don't know, I'm not saying that there isn't an explanation in reality for that thing. I just don't think it's supernatural. I think the reality is, people made up a story about something in the same way that people made up a story about Muhammad riding a flying horse, and in the same way that people made up a story about Joseph Smith talking to the angel Moroni and getting the seven, again, not the seven, but the golden tablets or whatever, right? I think these things do happen. And I think that actually makes up the best explanation that, this is just another story that's told, not an actual depiction of reality.
And that's fair enough. I understand. But I guess I'm making more of the relation between the fact that we don't know if this did happen. I'm presuming for a minute that it did, just for the illustration of this discussion, that in fact it does have a similar basis in what we know scientifically, right? I don't think you can depart so far from what we see, because what we see is disturbing. I mean, there are phrases by lots of different physicists related to quantum mechanics that cause them great uneasiness.
Sure.
We know that's true with Einstein. And
Sure.
I mean, look at all their hairstyles. their hairstyles are all over. My grandfather was a professor at the University of Washington, and his hair was that same way. Anyhow, but the fact is, they are disturbed by what they see because it is so unexplainable. It is so similar to what we would call magic. In fact, mysterious. A synonym of mysterious is spooky, and we know, obviously what I mentioned about Einstein, what he mentioned about spooky action at distance. So they are using these terms that are as close to the magical or mysticism world without trying to obviously dip into it. So I guess that's my response. I'm just mentioning it because reality as we know it, unfortunately, at the core, gets more mysterious as we look.
Kelley, you want to say something?
I could be wrong, but one of the things, I could be wrong, but like something that I'm hearing here is that we have things that theories, some ideas, hypotheses in science that we think may be correct, right? We think they may be correct. We think quantum physics is correct. From what we can tell, it's working out correctly. Nobody is saying this is 100%, 1,000 what's going on here, right? But it's a working model that we can work with. But when somebody says this miracle, these sticks turned into snakes, they're pretty damn sure of it, right? And so you're talking about somebody who's saying that something is a possibility and comparing it to something that's saying someone said actually happened and doesn't have an explanation for it. And I think that's a really important distinction that you're not making in your narrative.
I just don't see like mysteries in quantum mechanics making Yahweh any more plausible, right? I just don't see the connection. At best, what we see is some observations that we don't have explanations for. I don't see how God fills in that gap, if you will.
Yeah, and I apologize. I'm not trying to. It was the illustration you mentioned about the staffs. I'm not trying to suggest in my argument that we have the same evidence for what occurred there with Moses and Yahweh that we have, say, for certain quantum mechanical observations. So I'm not making that relation.
But that's the kind of thing that we're calling magic, though. When you do something like turning sticks into snakes, that's what we're calling magic.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe one of the things that we're having a problem here is that we're defining the word magic differently. To me, magic and miracle are pretty much synonymous. So when you're talking about a possibility of something that could happen through quantum physics, and then say this miracle happened, this magical thing happened, I seriously, I don't think there's a comparison between the two there.
Well, what I think my point, though, is that the things that you might relate to happening in the text, let's just say the Bible, different things, could have more explanation behind them that we simply don't have. And so we throw a word out there like magic, right? And so I'm trying to pull you down as a theist. I'm trying to pull the atheist down and say, well, wait just a minute.
Give me an
why is the explanation this is just a story not good enough? Why is that not sufficient?
Yeah.
Because I think because as a theist, obviously there's a prediction that it is true, right? There's but assertion that things. Yeah.
Why should I believe that a few thousand years ago magicians like actually turned staves into snakes? Like what on what basis, on what grounds?
From the basis of where you stand there, I couldn't convey a message that would be convincing. I acknowledge that.
Okay, well, I appreciate that.
There's no argument.
I mean, that's the
thing. I can't think of a single explanation.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, there's a big delay happening right now,
folks.
We're having a really
bad delay.
Apologies.
I'm really sorry.
Yeah, ever since Kelley got reconnected with us, we're having some delays issue there. So I'll say my piece real quick, Kelley. Like I could say that, and I'm not trying to bulldoze you here because I appreciate I appreciate what you're saying here, John Paul. But the thing is, right, I could say this for every story that I read in the Bible, pretty much, all the way up to the New Testament, right? It's just that maybe somebody is just not accurately recording what's happening in reality. And I have evidence that this has happened before. It happens every day with folks, right? It is an explanation, and I have to contend with all possibilities, not just, well, maybe there's, some forces beyond our comprehension. Sure, that's going to be true regardless, right? That's going to be true of every situation you look at. But the fact is that people are mistaken at worst and mistaken at best, sometimes lie at worst, right? I think the Bible shows evidence of being a combination of both. I think it's written by different people with different perspectives who don't have the best understanding of how reality works. And when you have a group of people like that, they come to conclusions that aren't true. We see this happen with all kinds of religious groups, not just Christianity, but it can lead to falsehoods. It's just not a reliable way of knowing about the world. So mysteries in quantum mechanics doesn't, to me, move the needle either way. I don't subscribe to this notion that, because we don't have all the explanations in the world, suddenly the whole Bible should be called into question as to whether or not, we can just dismiss it or think it's legitimate. I think that's too specious of a connection.
I agree. That wasn't the connection I was trying to make.
Yeah, it's a good point.
And
when you talk about these,
go ahead, Kelley.
You talk about some of these miracles. I want to go back to the Moses thing again, because as a geologist, I have no idea how the Red Sea could have parted and came back together so that the Hebrews could walk across it and be safe from Pharaoh's army. That doesn't make any sense. It goes against everything we know about physics. There's no way that could possibly happen of everything we know about physics. Not quantum physics, actual physics. What we know about gravity, what we know about water pressure, it just cannot happen. That is magic. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. You're not just talking about things that we can't explain with science. You're talking about things that are contradictory to science. And that's part of the point I'm having a problem with here, because you keep trying to compare these things to actual science, and they're not comparable. They're just not comparable.
So number one, I guess I wasn't trying to imply the connection that was made inference before. I was just talking mostly about the word related to the use of magic and supernatural. But to what you just said, Kelley, my response to that would be to say that I think it's objective to say that classical physics is at odds with quantum mechanics. And so I suppose it depends on when we're having this conversation.
It's not what I said.
Okay. Sorry, I was responding to both, so maybe could you...
Can you explain what we know about gravity and water pressure, which is why I brought those two things up, right? How did the Red Sea part? Mm-hmm. How did it do it? That is literally against physics. That is something that cannot happen, has never happened in history that we know of. So how do you explain something like that? That is literally contradictory to what we do know about physics.
Well, I would acknowledge that would.
And that's what I'm talking about as magic.
Yeah. Right. And all I'm saying is that magic.
And that's why I'm saying you can't compare the two.
Can't compare the two. I guess what we're talking about is the observation of an event and not having an explanation to the Red Sea parting. Agreed.
No. We're talking about an event that cannot happen. We have physical laws that the earth follows, and you're talking about events that cannot follow those laws. This is what I'm trying to communicate to you, and it seems like you're not understanding. Okay. You are talking about events that are against what we know about physics.
Okay, then I tell you what Why don't you describe to me?
It's like you think that we're it seems
Hang
to
on,
me
Kelley.
that you're
Kelley,
using the
Kelley,
word
Kelley,
magic to be
Kelley, there's a big
synonymous
delay
with
here. Please,
uncertainty.
let
Sorry.
John Paul respond, please. Thank you.
I'm really sorry, John Paul.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. I'm trying to figure it out too, because it's like there's different levels of delay for each one of you. So I'm trying to track through this. I guess what I would say to that is, and you may not like this example, I understand, but as it relates to unexplainable things, quantum entanglement, for instance, is still unexplainable. And so if you say to me, the Red Sea cannot part, we know it cannot part, I would grab, and I know this is not a appropriate, full answer, but I would just point to something like that and say, well, we know that physically quantum entanglement shouldn't be possible. So we know that things that are impossible do happen as we would hold them. Now we accept quantum entanglement because, okay.
I mean, well, why I would push back is I don't know if we would say that it should be impossible, because I mean it seems to happen here, right? I think I don't know, but maybe I'm pushing back too early here. I think like just this idea that, look, there's some spooky things happening in quantum mechanics. Again, like, we can talk about it all day. We can talk about all the things that we don't know about quantum mechanics. It just doesn't lead credence to theism, or I mean, even deism, really, but especially theism in any sort of way. I don't think it leads credence to supernatural or otherwise magic explanations. If we find out that the fundamental particles of reality actually operate on the rules of magic, I'm not even sure what that would mean, right? Because by and large, so far, we seem to have some sort of rules to have explanations thereof. And let's say that we do find out that there's some things that we just can't explain, that, these mysteries in quantum mechanics are just not fathomable, are just not calculable to human beings. Again, that could leave openness to a force beyond ourselves, but that doesn't mean that we can go back and look at these other things and say, well, that could lead credence to this. And, suddenly, as to Kelley's point, doesn't mean that the Red Sea, actually could have, parted, right? So I think that's where Kelley's frustration is coming from, because it's like this idea that, oh, there's some things that we can't explain here, suddenly opens a can of worms to justify anything that the Bible in particular is saying. I think that's where we have problems with.
Yeah, and I think I'm trying to make a more nuanced point related to the observer of the event that can't be explained, and that magic could be used or supernatural could be used in either instance. And so I'm not trying to make hey, there's lots of things unexplained, ergo God exists, and everything written in the Bible is true. That's far too great a leap, and that's not what I'm even trying to suggest. The nuanced point is that the observer not knowing what's going on creates the word magic or supernatural. And we have some of those instances where I believe that things that we hold scientifically true, or some other word, I suppose, than true, but things that we can observe that we don't understand, the term magic and supernatural could be applied to them. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to jump to, hey, everything in the Bible is true then. And I agree there's a separate mechanism to make that point, or if there is a possible point to be made there. I don't know if that nuanced.
I hear what you're saying. I guess I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if, hey, we don't know what something is going on here, then magic, right? There's a lot of things we don't know about human nutrition. I don't think that means maybe the underlying principles are magic, right? I still think that, yeah, there's at least evidence to believe that there is something physical going on, the same way with physics. Yeah, classical models of physics do end up with points of contention, but classical models of physics are still perfectly acceptable and valid explanations. And when we're talking about things that happen on a macro level, we still use classical physics to describe what happens when planes fly in the air, for example. We rely on that every day. for all of our transportation technology. So I don't know. I don't think that, oh, hey, here's something we don't know. I just don't think that we can just say, oh, well, there's a comparison we can make here to magic, because I think magic is an explicit denial, an explicit, classically speaking, right, an explicit sort of thing outside of the system that we know it. I just don't know. I don't know that I can get there with the point you're making there. But I think this was a good discussion regardless, and I do appreciate the nuance you do bring to it. Apologies that we're having some technical delays here, John Paul, but I've enjoyed a conversation with you before. I'd love to talk with you again. Unfortunately, we are out of time.